We have breaking news coming out of Russia this morning. The front in the Kursk incursion, which we've been covering here for the near 7 months since this battle started, is now crumbling. The collapse of the Ukrainian defensive lines, which have roughly held, at least marginally so, for most of this duration, are now crumbling significantly. And in the last 48 hours, there have been a dramatic change in the conditions of the two sides to where entire Ukrainian units have been seen fleeing from their battle positions. Some of them even fleeing from fortified positions that they have built, heading back toward the city of Sudzha. What you're seeing right now is some of the attacks from the Russian drones inside the city of Sudzha, which is something that hadn't been happening before. Everything has been kind of on the outskirts of the Kursk salient. Just to give you a real quick summary of what's been going on here in just the last 48 hours, here is Weeb Union to paint that picture.
The Russians have managed to advance in several areas of the front line here in the Kursk region. They've managed to capture Malaya Luknia as well as Luknia, as well as the area around them, surrounding them, to advance towards Yushny, where the culmination of the Ukrainian forces withdrawing from Malaya Luknia and the surrounding areas were heading towards Kasacha Luknia, and there is still the pocket here east of Yushny, where the Ukrainians are in the midst of a withdrawal from as well. The Russians are here moving from several directions, both from the eastern direction to capture Sessilevka and the remaining parts of Kobetkin. The Russians also managed to advance from the western direction through Luknia towards the fortified positions here west of Yushny, and from the Malaya Luknia direction along the railways towards connecting with the Russian forces within Sessilevka. The Russian forces also managed to advance towards Mirny through the eastern parts of Sudzha. The Russians are here moving along the railways to connect with their forces to the east of Sudzha by capturing the eastern parts of the town. The Russians also here looking to flank Mirny, where the Ukrainians are also withdrawing from, as well as the Sudzha airport, as well as Bondarivka and Agronom towards the western parts of Sudzha. And at the same time, the Russians also managed to advance to the south of Sudzha, where they've managed to capture parts of Makhnovka, the fortified position east of the town, and north of Cherkasskaya Konopelka.
Now, this has been a long battle that's going on. Many people complained on the Russian side anyway, that this was a slow operation, and many on the West ridiculed the Russian side and said, oh, they're so weak, they can't even close off this one incursion into this relatively unimportant area of Russia. Now, I just want to kind of recap a little bit about what this battle was, what it was claimed to be, and what it looked like it was. So on the Ukraine side, that this was claimed in the beginning that we're finally taking the fight to Russia itself. We're showing them on their ground what it's like to be invaded and making them pain. And at first, this caused a big upsurge in patriotism on the Ukraine side. It raised the morale of the troops, Ukraine troops, all up along the line, as they were very happy that finally some of the fighting was taking place not on their own home turf, but on the Russia's turf. And many in the West also said this shows that, how weak Russia is. They didn't even know what was coming in. Their intelligence was bad. Their border fortifications were very poor, and Ukraine was able to exploit that. The second thing that they said was that this is a great opportunity for the Ukraine side because it's going to take pressure off of the Eastern Front, which is where Russia had been making advances since late 2023, all the way through the entire 2024 and in early into 2025. But when this happened in August of last year, that's when the people were saying, hey, this is going to slow down the Russians here because they're going to have to move troops from the east to try and contain what was going on up in the north. That was the claim. What we saw on the ground was something very different. As a matter of fact, we didn't see any movement of Russian forces from the Eastern Front. Russia did move some forces around, but from inside Russia, from areas where they hadn't been engaged. And in case you're not aware, there's roughly 700,000 Russian troops inside Ukraine along the various fronts, but elsewhere there's somewhere around 700,000 to 800,000 other Russian forces that are producing territorial defense, border defense, etc., throughout the entire Russian Federation. So they have large numbers of troops elsewhere which is what they used, which makes perfect military sense. You wouldn't want to take guys off of a place where you're having tactical success and put them into another place when you have, an army that's a couple 100,000 bigger than the entirety of the U.S. active army. So that was either a bad miscalculation by the Ukraine side or just wishful thinking. I don't know, but Russia didn't fall into that trap. Now, that's if things were the way they were projected. But you may recall when we had Alexander Mercurius of the Duran on our show some number of months back, he told us how that he had been contacted about a month and a half before the Kursk operation happened and was told by someone who had good connections to the Russian side that actually Russia was aware that this was coming. As a matter of fact, they made certain movements within their side of the border, which would basically be an open gate for the Ukraine side to go up in there, because what they intended to do was to create a cauldron, a defensive perimeter around a large section from which they wanted the Ukraine side to go in there, because the calculation was, as was claimed anyway, that they wanted Ukraine to move into this area because they had seen the buildup. They were not taken by surprise as they were in the Kharkiv area in, I believe it was September of 2022, when the Ukraine side genuinely did have a big buildup and then swept away a thin layer of Russian troops in the Kharkiv area and ended up, recapturing, at least on the map, like 6,000 square kilometers that were ostensibly under Russian control. This time, according to that version, Russia was aware of it and was okay with them coming in to that part of Russia because it was strategically irrelevant. Didn't harm Russia. It wasn't preventing them from doing anything else, but they formed this cauldron around, which, whether it was intended or not, that is what they did. We certainly saw that on the map, where they had to make sure that Ukraine couldn't penetrate any further than it did. Some of the claims at the time were that the Ukraine side was really going to try and take a nuclear power plant that was in the Kursk Oblast much further to the north. Russia was positioned to make sure that that didn't happen. What it appears then, whether it was a design thing by the Russians or not, although the fact that that warning came to a source that we have a lot of confidence in, Alexander Mercurius, whether that was true or not, what we know for a fact is that's what Russia did. They kept this cauldron open and they continued to have, whether through drones, FAB strikes, airstrikes, artillery, mortars, and direct fire from tanks and armor personnel carriers and infantry, they continued to attrit and cause casualties to the Ukraine side. Ukraine, for its part, continued to put resource after resource, reinforcement after reinforcement, and the Russian side claims a huge number of killed in action. We can't, I don't have any way to independently verify it's right, but for sure it's in the tens of thousands of some of the best trained Ukrainian troops. Thousands, or many hundreds anyway, various military vehicles were going in there. And of course, they had to keep the supplies going in there. You had to keep reinforcements coming in, medical reinforcements coming in and out to bring the wounded out, etc. Just the daily, ammunition, the bullets, the drones, the artillery shells, the mortar shells, food, all the kinds of things, logistics for the vehicles to keep them running, etc. That was an enormous drain on the Ukraine side. It appears from looking at it, not taking anybody's word for anything, but just looking at it militarily, that Russia was content to let this go on for months, because every time Ukraine would send reinforcements into the Kursk pocket, they were not available Ukrainians to go into the Donbass area, which has always been the priority of effort for the Russian side. So that made their job there easier. And their objective, and understand this is so important because very few in the West seem to get this. Russia's primary objective is not territorial acquisition. That's a byproduct. Their primary objective is the destruction of the Ukrainian armed forces. So whether they do that in the Kursk area and in the Eastern Front or only on the Eastern Front is of little consequence, because it's the total force package of the Ukraine side. That's what they have been going after, and that is what they have stated openly. It's not anything hidden that you have to divine. They're stating it out loud. That's what they call demilitarization and denazification. Those are two elements of the same concept, though there's some differences in each. And so that is what Russia has been doing. But now it appeared that for reasons that we can only speculate here, I don't have as much clarity, even looking at the evidence, that maybe one of a couple of things have happened. Either the Ukraine side or the Russian side said, okay, this is now no longer useful to us. It's no longer beneficial. There's now more value in getting rid of it. So now that all of a sudden they punch in a multi-front area, as you just saw from that Web Union piece there, all of a sudden, simultaneously, Russia's putting pressure on at least 4 different directions inside of the salient. They're basically squeezing it from all sides. They have taken under fire control the one remaining good resupply road that was in the south. They've taken that under aerial fire, under drone attack, etc. So that's what they had been doing. What seems to have caused this big chain reaction here, and now all of a sudden these large-scale Ukrainian withdrawals from within the pocket was a pretty amazing thing that the Russian side did to get inside of a big gas pipeline that ran through the area. They opened up a passage on the Russian side and then moved 16 kilometers inside the Ukraine side to emerge inside or near the outskirts rather of the city of Sudzha, which is the one big town that has been inside of the Kursk pocket from the beginning, and it's kind of the linchpin of the entire operation, the entire defense. So all of a sudden, Russian troops showed up out of nowhere in the rear of the enemy, which caused many to panic and started what appears to have been a pretty rapid collapse. As a matter of fact, in just overnight, in the last one day, Russia took 4 separate settlements, small towns, inside along the outskirts leading into it, because the Ukraine side is now withdrawing because they don't know where the Russian troops are. And as you may also saw in that map I showed, there's a number of incursion fingers inside of it. So all of a sudden Russians are in front and they're behind all over the place. And I can tell you from my knowledge of military experience, and certainly my own combat experience, when you show up in a place you're not expected, it causes panic among the defenders. And that's what we're seeing play out right now. Interesting thing here about this whole operation shows an increasing sophistication, not just in combined arms, but also in operational art by the Russian side, and it's something we better be paying a lot of attention to. This wasn't just that they said, hey, how's about we use this pipeline and go in here? Because this had to be substantially coordinated at both the operational level as well as the tactical level, and the Russians showed they can do it. Here's a piece of actually how that happened, shown by Military Summary this morning.
The Russians during the 7th of March tried to destroy as many as possible gas transportation facilities that were located on the territory of Poltava region. A lot of gas transportation systems were destroyed. Those transportation systems that Ukrainians could easily use to send gas back on the territory of Sudzha and to kill Russian soldiers that were currently located inside of the pipelines. But the Russians managed to destroy them, and most likely when the time came and when the Ukrainians realized that it's time to do something with this gas, maybe to send the gas back to the pipelines on the territory of Sumy, they couldn't do this because the systems, the facilities were completely destroyed by the Russian air missile strike. And now let's move to the Sudzha direction. So the situation and the operation was very simple. The Russian soldiers were forced and had just one simple mission. They needed to move through the 16th of kilometers of pipelines from the territory under complete Russian control towards the territory under complete Ukraine control. So let's assume that this is the Russian soldiers. They moved 16 kilometers, and the main purpose was to move through the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine and to land infantry somewhere here in this point.
And that's exactly what they did. And I'm going to show you on the map where we're talking about here. Here is the Kursk salient where all that was happening. This is Poltava down here. This is a fairly major city in the Ukraine where a lot of activity has actually been going. It's kind of a hub. As you see, there's a lot of major roads coming into it also. It's got access to multiple parts of the front. So a lot of things come through Poltava anyway. And this came as in this recent batch of Russia hitting large numbers of energy facilities, embassies around Ukraine, in the far west, all the way up to the western border and several other places, which they've been doing for a while. So by itself, that didn't elicit any kind of unusual experience for the Ukraine side. They didn't think much of it, except that the specific stations that were hit here in Poltava had control of the flow of gas that could go up to the pipeline that went through Sudzha. Now, the pipeline hasn't been used for a long time, obviously, because of the war, but they had the capacity, the Ukraine side did, to turn gas on if they wanted to. And if they found out Russia was in it, then they would have turned that on. And of course, it would have killed anyone inside the pipeline. But the Russians bombed that at first, and that was several days ago. And I saw a description today on one of the Russian Telegram channels where one of the officers was talking about that this had been planned for the past 3 weeks. So they'd been talking about, setting their aircraft attacks sequencing to match it with strategic bombing that they had been doing with the airstrikes or with the drones or with long-range missiles, etc. And so then they, hid it inside of one of those so that no one could tell that was a specific thing at a specific time here. So as military summary showed there, once the Ukraine side figured it out, now they can't do anything about it because this had been turned off. Now, I'll zoom in here a little bit more, and this is in the inside Sudzha, and you see that because of what happened back here, that because a lot of this stuff in just the last few days or so was under Ukraine control. But once this stuff started collapsing, now people are escaping from all these places, and then Russia's putting more pressure from this direction here, from up here. I mean, literally, all these red spaces right here are recent incursions. This, by the way, is something to keep an eye on. This red line right here, this is the border between Ukraine and Russia. And this is where they have moved up into. So you see, they don't have a whole lot left anyway. But this red area here is not shrinking the Sudzha pocket, but it's actually in the Sumy region. One of the things Russia has been doing, which we've shown you recently, is they've been attacking in this direction here to cut off this one supply road here and moving in here to have a pincer movement. Now, that's going to come into play here in a minute, because the question is going to be, if this continues on at this speed, what is going to be next for the Russian side? Because taking Sudzha here is going to be, it could be still a hard fight. If Ukraine says, no, we're not going to give this up, we're going to continue to fight to the last man, then this could take, even a number of weeks longer, because Ukraine have shown when they stay and fight tenaciously, it's hard to get them out. But since we've already seen a lot of, entire companies of Ukraine soldiers have been seen in video withdrawing and moving to other parts, abandoning defensive positions and strong points that they had created to get back into Sudzha, it seems to me like it's pretty unlikely. And I'll just tell you, from really from a humanitarian and also military perspective, there is absolutely no reason why Ukraine command should allow them to continue fighting. They should right now, while they still have this open here, before this gets cut off from these 2 points and all of these troops, and there's anywhere between 15 and 20,000, depending on who you want to listen to right now, some large number. Otherwise, you're going to sacrifice those troops for nothing. If you make them fight in Sudzha to the last, they'll either be killed or captured, and you won't have them anywhere else. The only thing that makes any sense from the Ukraine side is to withdraw those troops immediately, because then the question is going to be, is Russia going to stop here once they reestablish the border area in this here? So all these areas north of that are on the right side of this red line here. Once Russia reestablishes all this, are they just going to stop there? They already had this incursion in the Sumy area here already. Will they continue on further? And what is Ukraine side going to do if the Russians don't stop at the border but continue on with this offensive? You recall about 2 weeks ago, I showed you that Zelensky claimed that the Russian side had 150,000 troops up in the north of that area there. If that's true, and if Russia now starts a general offensive in the north, what is Ukraine going to do? Because then you have to look back at the continuing operations that are going on in the Eastern Front. They're continuing to move in. The Russians are not slowing down their offensive operations in those areas, and the pressure is high. If the Russians now start to move in an area where Ukraine has fewer troops and they don't have enough troops to hold off that incursion, now then, let me run back and show you that again, because let's look at some of the ramifications of where else that could have impact. Is look how close this is to some of the other major cities here. So it's behind Kharkiv, and there's already Russians incursion there. That's been there for quite a long time now. Kiev is in this direction here, and is the Ukraine side going to say, I'm going to keep all of our guys here on the eastern front and try to keep Kursk and try to keep them in the Kupiansk area to avoid that? If all of a sudden there genuinely is over 100,000 combat troops this close to Kiev, you think that they're not going to withdraw these troops here and to try to bring up a new line of defense? And here's the problem: they don't have any fortifications up here. They haven't built any, not in any number anyway. And you can't just make that stuff up real quick and you start moving people around. It's the classic kid with his finger in the docks. You don't have enough finger for the leaks. There is a real danger for the Ukraine side here, just in terms of the war. Forget about these negotiations that are going on. This could be a real problem with whether the war is going to go on or not, because there is right now, and we're going to talk about this afternoon, by the way, with Colonel Jacques Beau. There is a team. In fact, Zelensky himself is in Saudi Arabia right now. He's going to meet with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Tomorrow, his team is going to meet with the American team, which is led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who also landed today. That will be happening tomorrow. For that to have any significance at all, the Ukraine side is going to have to be able to hold the lines. And you were starting to see now, and you just saw on that map, where the cracks in the entire defensive capacity for Ukraine is starting to look really, really wobbly. Now, what do you think that's going to do to the negotiation process? Russia's aware of all these things. They set this stuff up. I just showed you. They've got increasing sophistication even in the operational art, much less just at the tactical level. I've already told you that they have a decisive and irrevocable advantage on all the components that goes into making national combat power that can never be met in the current war by the Ukraine side here. So how effective do you think they're going to be willing to negotiate there? Now, a rational person who's in charge of the Ukraine side would see all of this and think, it's about the time to do what we should have done in Istanbul in 2022, what we should have done at the end of 2023, what we should have done in the summer of 2024, what Trump's trying to get us to do now. Get this over with on the best terms available as quickly as possible so that we don't lose any more territory or men or cities. That's what he should do. But instead, here is Volodymyr Zelensky talking about what his view is in light of what was happening in Kursk just yesterday.
Головкома Сирського, фронт, основні напрямки на Донеччині та Курська операція. Я хочу подякувати всім нашим підрозділам, які стійко та попри все знищують окупанта, відбивають штурм та захищають наші позиції. Дипломатія буде сильною тільки на сильних фронтових позиціях. І ми робимо все для того, щоб українські фронтові потреби були забезпечені.
Yeah, but I mean that briefs well on a map in your bunker, but when it doesn't comport to reality, what do you think is going to happen? Just consider. Let's look first of all at the Saudi Arabian component here. You have always said, he and many of the European backers to Zelensky have said that this whole Kursk area is something we can use as a bargaining chip. We will give you back your territory in Kursk in exchange for, they didn't know for sure what, but something. That'll be a big bargaining chip. Well, now then, on the eve of the next meeting in Riyadh, or it's actually Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, all of a sudden you may not have anything to give. And if you don't have the troops to stop it there, because militarily, I can't imagine that Russia would just reestablish the border and stop. I mean, why would they? There's no military reason to do so. And if you have the enemy on their back foot, and even the supporters of Ukraine in Europe are openly using that phrase, Ukraine is on the back foot, Russia's on the front foot. They're even admitting this, which is saying a lot, because they haven't been willing to admit what's actually going on the ground for quite some time. Now then, many of them are. And that is happening. So if, as I just showed you on there is not a lot of defensive positions between that Sumy incursion there and now what's the collapsing Kursk pocket and Kiev. What do you think is Zelensky's going to do? Because he now has no bargaining chip whatsoever. He never really did, by the way. There was never, ever, ever, ever any possibility that Vladimir Putin would negotiate to get his territory back in Kursk as opposed to seizing it by force. There was no possibility ever. Now then, though, even the fiction is about to evaporate because potentially within 2 or 3 days, this whole thing could go on. Like I said, maybe there's enough troops that they'll be willing to fight to the death for no reason in Sudzha. I don't know. They have done that in other cities, so they may. But they also may not, just out of sheer exhaustion, out of the lack of support. In fact, I separately saw another report that said that the Ukraine side, this is reported by the Western side, is saying they were already suffering an acute shortage of ammunition and other kinds of logistics necessary to keep fighting. So even if they wanted to, they may not be able to. So this could be over within 2 or 3 days or maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Who knows? Probably not going to go much longer than that. And then what do you have left? If you don't have any defensive barriers down here, I mean, it would be almost foolish for the Russian side to just stop at the border. I rather think that they're going to continue moving on south. And where they go, whether they go down to Poltava, whether they try to move and cut off the Kharkiv area, or whether they swing to the west and head in the direction of Kiev again, which would cause many to panic. Of course, I can't say. There's too many variables and there's too many options. There's a lot of things they could do, but the absence of defensive fortifications and personnel is a huge opportunity should the Russians choose to exploit it. And of course, their primary objectives and the primary large number of their troops in the Eastern Front continue to put relentless pressure on the Ukraine side. And as I've told you, it's a really an unpredictable thing of when an army may collapse. It happened in literally about 9 or 10 days to the combined French, British armies in May 1940, when the Germans penetrated into a place called Sedan through the Ardennes forest, got behind that cumulative people. It showed up someplace they weren't expected. And then the entire defense collapsed. And a week later, German troops had driven across France and were at the very English Channel. And we all know how that happened after that. But the Ukraine side has not broken so far. The Russians haven't gotten behind them anywhere. This is a tactical issue here. So far on the operational or strategic level, there hasn't been any breakthroughs like that. But we don't know how much longer the psychology of the Ukraine forces can continue on, because concurrent with all this, you also have the potential that the Ukraine soldiers can just say, man, I can read a map. I know what's happening on the ground here. And Zelensky's talking this nonsense up here that, we're going to hold the line and we're going to win through diplomacy and all this kind of stuff. And they may say, screw that. I'm not going to commit suicide for something that doesn't even have a chance of success. And that's Zelensky's position there is reinforced in not a way that he wants. It sounds really good to a Western audience because we love bravery and all this kind of stuff. But what I'm about to show you from one of their parliamentarians yesterday, this shows you what the Ukrainian leadership thinks on the negotiating level as they're heading into Saudi Arabia.
In my personal view, there are 3 things. First is our territorial integrity de jure, meaning that occupied territories, Ukrainian territories by Russians, yes, they will be controlled by Russians after the end of hostilities, at least part of them, but they are Ukrainian territories. That is very important for us to keep this non-recognition policy, because one day the last colonial empire in Europe will fall apart, speaking about Russia, and Ukraine will regain control over territories. Number 2 is sovereignty, meaning that Ukraine makes its own choices about what army to have, what military production to expand, and what alliances to join. This is very important. Number 3 is security guarantees, meaning that, first of all, definitely from European Union and European countries, meaning what will prevent Russia from attacking again. So these are 3 things. Again, territorial integrity de jure, sovereignty, and security guarantees, which I think should be our red lines.
Our red lines. So we're not going to give up any territory. We'll just say, yeah, you'll have temporary control over them for now. This is what they think that they're going to have as the end state of these negotiations. He thinks that the Russians are going to agree to and sign a deal that says we will just pretend like these aren't really Russian territories. We'll pretend like they're still yours. You just won't talk about them. You're going to keep open the opportunity for Ukraine to set their own alliances as they may sit in the future, a la a future NATO entry. And then I want security guarantees from somebody. And you think Russia is going to agree to all that? Lord have mercy, folks. I mean, what planet are these people living on? I just showed you just a snapshot of the military situation that you know all so well. Russia is in leading in every capacity you can even imagine. Ukraine has done nothing but fall backwards for, I think the number's like 30 or something consecutive months. They have been on the losing end of this stuff here. And now then you have President Trump has stopped for the moment, paused any in American aid. And whether he pauses or unpauses it is irrelevant, because he is not, the only thing he's pausing is what had already been approved in the previous administration. There is no possibility, not even a discussion, that the U.S. would come with any more new supplies. So whenever these run out if a pause is ever lifted, it's just going to keep the trickle flowing a bit longer. You can't fight a war like that, even if you had the manpower, even if you had the capacity, which they don't. So given all of those factors, it is irrational to the highest degree to keep on having this fiction that you're going to, through strength, force Russia into doing things that they have categorically rejected. Russia's side has said, we're not going to have a ceasefire. We're going to continue fighting. That there will be no foreign troops in any kind of peacekeepers coming in especially from the European side, especially NATO troops, unless we expressly agree to it. And there's not going to be any NATO now in the medium term or ever. There is going to be the denazification. There is going to be a demilitarization. Those are the positions of the Russian side. And folks, just look at it. Who's got the power? Does the Ukraine side have the power to compel Russia to accept the terms of that parliamentarian, to accept the terms that Zelensky was talking about there? Or does the Russian side have the power to compel compliance on all 5 of the things I just mentioned here? You know the answer. Now, the question has to come into view of what is the Trump administration going to do? Because it doesn't take a genius to be able to see, especially if it's not your country and you can unemotionally just look at the facts. Trump is not of the mindset to keep going down a path that he thinks is going to fail. It's probably not a slip of the tongue to where he has said several times in just recent days, it's not clear that Ukraine will survive as a country at all, because he sees the spreadsheets that I just talk about. That's what's going on here. So the question is going to be, when will the Ukraine side finally start to, quote, get the memo? Well, we're going to try to talk about that a little bit here with Gary Villapiano, the other half of this partnership that we've been doing here for a long time at Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Gary, it's hard for me to figure some of this stuff out, man. I mean, what do you think it's going to take for the Ukraine side to start saying, all right, here's what we're going to do that can be justified on a map?
Yeah, right. Don't confuse us with the facts, Danny. To see the noose tightening the way you just showed, very eloquently there, it's quite something that that Zelensky is willing to just glide over that all. I think my only guess is that he thinks his words have that kind of impact, his influence that he has by what he says. I think he thinks his charisma, as you see it affecting those in Europe, the European Union, will carry him through far enough that he can obtain some of his goals in spite of what's going on the ground.
After the debacle in the White House meeting a week ago Friday, when the arguments happened between Vice President Vance and then Trump with Zelensky, et cetera, I remember the day after that there was a comment given by National Security Advisor Mike Waltz on the White House grounds, where he seemed to be He seemed to be like the same as us. Like he would probably be a good guest on our show because I remember him saying something like, I'm not even clear that they want to have peace. So if he's
Right.
clear on that, especially heading into Saudi Arabia here tomorrow, what do you think? What is your guess about what Mike Walls is going to say behind the scenes?
Dan, it's like I've said before. I think they're going to read them the riot act. I think they're fed up. We know that Trump is fed up. He keeps his composure. Trump, I think, for him, he keeps his composure when he talks about the situation. I think there's like, cut it out, quit the nonsense. We've proven we mean business. We've removed military aid. We've removed intelligence. Do you really want to go into this alone? Because you will go into this alone. We're not following you into this, mirage that you're trying to draw us into. We don't buy it. So either get with the program or sayonara.
And that leads to a real tricky possibility. Now, Trump is already, and the administration is already being accused of being Putin puppets, of being Russian lovers, of maybe even being a Russian asset, etc. Because they still believe, and this is much more in Europe, but certainly in some quarters here, even in the U.S., that there's a choice still to be made. That Trump can just choose to keep doing what Biden was going to do. I mean, that's what they want. They want the pause to be lifted in intel and supplies. They want more stuff to be going to Europe. I just got to ask, I mean, because you read a lot of stuff and you go pour over tons of sources every day. Do you think that the people who support this, whether in Europe or in the United States, this continuing idea, that they ever stop to go, hang on, with all of Europe and all of the Biden administration for 3 years, we tried that and it never even slowed down this 30 consecutive months of losses I've talked about. Why do you suppose they think it would make a difference now?
Dan, it behooves me, and we both look at it in awe that these aren't stupid people, so that's not the issue. They must get some of the briefings as to what you just presented, you laid out. They must have some of that, and I think on top of that all, my only guess is that they have reputations to uphold. They have a belief in what they keep saying. We want to defend democracy. We want to defend liberty. Ukraine deserves this. We're going to make sure it happens. And if they were to backpedal on that, they'll backpedal on what they think is their personal constitutions of fighting for the underdog and make sure that liberty does prevail in Ukraine, even in spite of what they're seeing unfold on the ground. So to have to eat their humble pie, I don't think they're willing to do it, and they will push on. Just as we saw Starmer, we saw what happened, just a few days ago, on how they're all they called their emergency urgent meeting to gather their forces, even admitting, but America, we are going to need a little bit of your backing here to pull this off. So will you back up our ridiculous plan? And that's what we're left with.
What worries me, I'm one of the many things, I guess, is that I can see that, the refusal to eat humble pie that'll, cut my ability to, I don't know, survive and exceed on this, the high plane, the high levels that they are, and, always popular, et cetera, being put in CNN, Fox, MSNBC, et cetera. They don't want to put that at risk, but at the cost of the Ukrainian people, because you said it a second ago that they're not dumb people, they're smart. But if they're smart, wouldn't they be able to see that, yeah, but if I keep going down this path, and if Trump did it, all of a sudden it's going to get Ukraine even more of them killed, and they're just not going to succeed? Or do they put that much thought through it?
Danny, that's what's striking me. We've heard Trump regularly now grieving on the death, grieving on all these soldiers on both sides that are paying the price, the dearest price, life and death. So they're paying with their lives. And you see how it's, you can call, Trump, the master salesman or whatever you want to call him, and you cannot believe him. But I sense that there is a real grieving, and he is tired of it. Tired. He's fed up with it. He's not going to put up with it any longer. And he's doing everything in his power to stop the death. And we've heard him say that repeatedly. For some reason, on the other side, they think that's a cost worth pain. And yes, there's a lot of bloodshed. We understand, you know, I mean, to say it crudely, you know, you can't make an omelet without cracking the eggs, really. So you're going to go that far with the people that are being sacrificed over and over and over, to the point where they're, you know, they're dragging, you know, kicking and screaming their soldiers into throwing them on the front line, lowering the draft age. I think those in power are so removed from the actuality of, you know, what it all means and the price that's being paid, even though what a generation, maybe 2 generations of Ukrainians are just disappearing. They see that as a worthy, honorable pursuit, and that's what's so troubling.
You know, I want your thoughts on one. There's an additional theory, is that they know for sure. They're making all these comments and say we should continue on. Trump should lift all the holds, et cetera, because they know he's not going to. And there are some theories that say all of these folks who have been supporting the war all this time are building the stakes of the preparation for the stab in the back theory, that we had everything set up. You remember, you showed me, you found that clip of Secretary of State Blinken on the way out on his exit interview saying we have Ukraine in a position where they can stand on their own, et cetera. And then now here comes Trump, just pulls the rug out from under them, and everything was on a good path. But then Trump did this. And so whatever comes out of this negotiated settlement, which will be bad for Ukraine, it's going to be Trump's fault. And then they're going to say that at the end. Do you think that that's in the cards?
Oh, definitely, Danny. They listen, they won't hesitate to do that. You know, the derangement syndrome runs so deep and so far. They would do that in a second. So yeah, I do. And
you know, that's angering and perverse to me, because as we've been making the case since we've had a Daniel Davis deep dive, it has been their policies to pursue the war and ignore the diplomatic off-ramps that were offered before and during the war that is responsible for this loss. Trump came in there, even if he wanted to actually move to a military victory, it was impossible because of the profoundly bad policies that all of the Western countries, to include the United States, did before this. And I just hope that in enough time, we'll be able to highlight that truth so that they can't hide behind this fake stab in the back theory that they themselves laid the foundation for. That's the real truth.
Dan, you've done that several times already in the course of, you know, the last couple of years, actually. So there won't be a problem, at least on our part.
There won't be a problem. We're going to continue telling the truth, and we're going to flip this away. And I just, you know, we don't get any, I guess, good feelings from it, no satisfaction from being right, because being right is observing this carnage of these massive fields of cemeteries that have been created, that, you know, like you said so painfully a second ago, generations have been wiped out to support this nonsense and this foolishness on the parts of so many of these so-called elites in the establishments of the Western countries. And that is going to be something I think historians will be very, very unkind to all those who supported this war when it was clear it could never have been won.
Agreed. Wow. Yes.
But all we can do is tell the truth, and are encouraged by the fact that the Trump administration seems to be acutely aware of all those facts and is moving to end that death and destruction. No matter how ugly it'll be on the diplomatic front and the PR front for a while, the killing will stop, and Trump seems to be focused on that. I wonder if you can tell us, we got a couple of other shows today. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about what's coming.
Oh yeah, we got Jacques Beau on there. Now, Danny, I think the last we had talked, we were still working on our details. Colonel Jacques will be on at gosh, what time is it?
2 p.m. I think, right?
At 2 p.m. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, and you had determined what you want to do.
We're going to talk to him about this. We're going to go into some details. I mentioned briefly about the Saudi Arabia meetings that are going to be going on and what's going to be coming out of that. He's going to give us his view, especially from the European viewpoint, on what can we expect coming out of the Saudi Arabia meetings. And then our good friend Larry Johnson will be at 3:30 p.m.
Yes, live from Russia. This is fantastic.
Yeah, he has been meeting with some very high-ranking folks here, and he's up there with Judge Knapp. And so he's been kind of coy about what he's going to say. So we don't know for sure what he's going to be having there, but I know he had some really amazing meetings to come in. So we're very eager to find out what he's going to say. Definitely don't want to miss this one because I'm hoping that he's coming back with some information about what the Russians may be thinking in this heading into these Saudi Arabian meetings. So could be a real interesting visit we'll have here. And I'll also one more time mention I had last week said that there may be a big announcement today. Turns out some events beyond my control have interceded, and so we're going to push that off. Maybe later in the week, I don't know for sure, but one's coming, so I'll let you know when it is. And sorry for the delay.
Danny, the master of mystery here. Okay.
All right. Sorry to be teasing it like that. But anyway, thank you guys for being with us today. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't done that already, because we are unintimidated and uncompromised. We will bring you the truth, whatever it is, because you need that to make sense of your world. Thank you very much. We'll see you this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Amen.